Aloha, everyone. Welcome, and thank you so much for joining us. We're going to get started, and really happy that you're all here today. My name is Andrea Nandoscar, and I'm the Education Program Manager at Historic Hawaii Foundation. And just to make sure you're in the right place, you're in the second lecture for this 36th Annual Experts Historic Preservation Lecture Series. I want to mahalo our event partner, who is also today's speaker, Dr. Ralph Kam, the curator and coordinator of the Expert Series. And Dr. Kam is a lecturer with the Historic Preservation Graduate Certificate Program, the American Studies Department at the University of Hawaii at Manoa. Historic Hawaii is very pleased to co-sponsor this series. And this year's series theme is historic cemeteries. Just a note that for housekeeping that all the lectures are being recorded, and the HHF YouTube channel will have all of them available immediately afterward if you want to watch them again or share them with people. We're being live streamed right now to the YouTube channel and to Historic Hawaii's Facebook pages. If you have questions as we go through, please type them in the chat and we will have a chance for Q&A at the end of the presentation. And we'll address as many as we can. You can also feel free to shoot me an email if for some reason your question isn't answered, and I'll make sure it gets to Dr. Kam. Then we also have a brief survey at the end, which is really, really helpful for us. So if you can just take a couple minutes to pop into that survey and just respond to it, we'd be really grateful. For those who may be new to Historic Hawaii Foundation, we're a statewide nonprofit. We help people save historic places. These are sites that range many layers of history in Hawaii, and we do this through education, advocacy, assistance, and protection of and for historic places. I'd now like to warmly welcome Dr. Ralph Kam. He will be presenting on Mauna Ala Royal Mausoleum in Nuanu, on Oahu. And before he begins, I just want to give you a little more background. He curates the series, as I've mentioned, and Dr. Kam holds an MA and a PhD in American Studies from the University of Hawaii at Manoa, specializing in Asian Pacific American Studies and Media Studies. And he also holds an MA in Public Relations from the University of Southern California. He's author of Death Rights and Hawaiian Royalty, Funerary Practices in the Kamehameha and Kalakaua Dynasties from 1819 to 1953, which was published in 2017. He's the co-author of Partners in Change, a biographical encyclopedia of American Protestant missionaries in Hawaii and their Hawaiian and Tahitian colleagues between 1820 and 1900. That was published in 2018. And most recently, he authored Lost Palaces of Hawaii, Royal Residences of the Kingdom Period, 2022. He's contributed 11 articles to the Hawaiian Journal of History, including determining the birth date of Kauikeouli, Kamehameha III, with Ashley Dark-Smith. Welcome, Dr. Kam, and I hope everyone enjoys the presentation.
Thank you, Andrea. Today I talk on a topic that I've written extensively about, and it never fails to amaze me what new things are brought up as I look at Mauna Ala. So the first thing I wanted to do was to set why we're looking at Mauna Ala in the first place. So my thoughts are that Mauna Ala represents the culmination of a transition of royal burial practices from the traditional to the Western. And that's what a thread that you'll see going through the talk today. Now, to start out looking at the royal burial practices, it makes most sense to look at one of the final ones, and that was at the death of Kamehameha I. This is what the Pacific Commercial Advertiser had to say of that death and burial. Of Kamehameha I, there is no coffin, He died May 8, 1819, and it is supposed that his body was dissected in accordance with the old pagan custom then in force. Whatever has been done with the bones, they are lost. Nothing remains of them save some of his teeth, which it is said are preserved in the coffin of one of his queens. Now, to say that the bones were lost is, I think, slightly incorrect. They were hidden. Kamehameha's bones were hidden by two of his closest companions, and the descendants of one of his companions, Olulu, are still the kahu at Mauna Ala. So this is, I think, a representation of how the past and the traditions that were in place when Kamehameha died are still, in a way, having an impact today. So Kamehameha I was probably the last of the royal burials that were done in accordance with the burial practices of the traditional Native Hawaiian practices. As we discussed last week, Levi Parsons Bingham, the son of Hiram and Sybil Bingham, had a big impact on the way that deaths and burials were perceived. So you have him dying January 16, 1823, and he is buried in the cemetery that was discussed last week. So this is the stone that's on his burial site. And notice though that his brother Jeremiah Everett Bingham is also on the stone. So this stone was not in place when Levi Parsons Bingham first was buried, but it had an impact because shortly after this burial, and beyond the burial, you have the lying in state, you have the procession to the grave site, and you have the burial. That process was seen by the Ali'i, and they asked that the next death that was of a royal person be done in a similar manner. That person was the youngest daughter of Kamehameha I, and her name was Kauai. So they did a similar service, procession, and the burial was done at the fort. So this is a depiction of the Honolulu fort that was at the base of Fort Street. And somewhere in this fort, she was buried. This is in an account by Marin. So I couldn't tell you where in this painting Kauai was buried, but she was buried in the fort. And also Alapai, another royal person, was also buried in the same place as Kauai. So the practice of going from hidden bones to a known site is a practice that is slowly evolving as we go forward. The most sacred wife of Kamehameha, Keopu Olani, died September 16th, 1823. So you see, very shortly after this, she was one of the first Christian converts, and you can see the in this depiction of the wailing at the time, they put a flag, the Hawaiian flag, in front of her halepili. The account has her being put into a stone house after her death. So the practice of having a burial site that was known above ground in this case dates back to her death. She had in that same building the former king of Kauai, and their hope was that on the resurrection day, both of them would arise from the grave at the same time. So this is the most sacred queen of Hawaii, and her death, again, having burial practices that are more on the western side. The most crucial event that happened that tipped the burials, I think, into the highest form of royal burials were the deaths of Kamehameha II and Kamamalu. So this is July 8th, 1824, and July 14, 1824 in London. They were lying in state in St. Martin's in the Field, a church there in London, were put on board the British ship. Their coffins were funded by the King of England. And so you have the highest form of burial being given to the Hawaiian king and his queen. They arrive in 1825, and they are initially taken to the Halipili of Kalanimoku, which would have been at the end of this street. Kalanimoku had a complex nearby where the current capital would have been. But eventually, they are put into a coral structure in Pohukaina, and it's this mausoleum that is the first step towards what we see at Mauna Ala. So this is the coral structure that during the takeover by Great Britain, Judd is said to have had the papers of the Kingdom of Hawaii in that room and used Kahumanu's coffin as a desk. So this is the Pohukaina Mausoleum. And it is this building behind it. Over here is the Haleali'i, later called Iolani Palace. This is the original Iolani Palace before the one that was constructed by King Kalakaua. And this property, the property that Haleali'i was on, was expanded when Kalakaua built the palace. So Pohukaina is now on the palace grounds. And you will see where it was, there's a mound on the palace grounds that marks the space of that structure. Another death of importance, Nahianaena, the sister of Kamehameha III, and she is brought back to Maui, and there the complex at Moku'ula, where Kamehameha III maintained its residence, there are accounts of a special room being set aside for the coffins of Keopuolani and Nahianaena. So this is Waine'e Church in 1855. The graveyard at that church today holds the remains of the people that were at Moku'ula. And so not all of the kings and queens are buried at Mauna Ala. There are exceptions, and these are some of the exceptions to that. This is Prince Albert, not to be confused with Prince Albert Kuniokea. This is the son of Queen Emma and Kamehameha IV. He was going to be baptized and the godson of Queen Victoria of England, but he died. He was baptized shortly before his death at age 4. The building you see behind him is Haleali'i, and it is his death that starts the move to build Mauna Ala. So his death in 1862, at that time, the king and queen had invited the Anglican Church to send a bishop to Hawaii. And so the first Bishop of Honolulu arrived too late to baptize the young prince, but he was able to support the king and queen in their grief. So the building that was being used as the mausoleum at Pohukaina was too full to allow for the burial of the young prince. And so Kamehameha IV commissioned the first professional architect in Hawaii, Theodore Heuch, and he was a German-born, and he had arrived in Honolulu in 1850. So besides Mauna Ala, he also designed the Iolani Barracks. These were the barracks that were not in their current location. They were located on the state capitol grounds. And Queen's Hospital, which was started by Kamehameha IV and Queen Emma, had also a building designed by him. And he returned to Germany in 1874. And so it's his design. You can tell the difference between the design of Mauna Ala and the design of the barracks. They're very different structures. So Mauna Ala, or the Royal Mausoleum, was built to house the bodies of Kamehameha IV and his son, the Prince of Hawaii. You can tell by the building that it is definitely a Western style building. This style is called a Gothic Revival. The Gothic style was used in many churches in Europe. And so this is a continuation of the move towards the culmination of moving towards Western traditions in burial, especially royal burials. This is Thomas Staley. He was the first Bishop of Honolulu from 1862 when he arrived till 1870. And he is the one who dedicated Mauna Ala. And that would actually play into some of the friction that was occurring later. Now, some say that he was sent on a political mission to bolster the influence of the British. But from what I've read of his life and of the interactions with the king and queen, I would say that they invited him because the queen was in a British family, and the Anglican Church would have been the church that that family would have worshipped in that method. So Kamehameha IV dies soon after his son. And his remains are deposited in the finished portion of the Royal Mausoleum on February 3rd, 1864. Now, the design of Mauna Ala is cross-shaped, and it's called a Latin cross. So it's not the four sides that are equal. One portion of the building is longer than the other three wings. So one wing was completed, and Kamehameha IV was brought there, and then that evening, his son was also moved to Mauna Ala. Queen Emma was distraught. She had moved from being Kalele o Kalani, the departing of the one, to Nalani. And with both her husband and her son in that structure, the grieving Queen Emma remained at Mauna Ala for several weeks and camped out in the day in a tent nearby. So the beginnings of Mauna Ala are very sad. October 30th, 1865. So the king and his son are brought to Mauna Ala in February. These are the other Alii that were brought to Mauna Ala in October. The mausoleum down at Pu'ukaina, it was very full, and so these are the individuals: Liho Liho, or Kamehameha II, Kamehameha III, Kamehameha IV is there, the Prince of Hawaii is there, Queen Kamamalu is brought up, Queen Kahumanu. Number 8, Kamanele is a very interesting individual that was in the transfer to Mauna Ala, and I'll talk about her later. Abner Paki, Laura Konia, they're the parents of Bernice Pawahi Bishop. Moses, David, William Pitt Leleiohoku, John Pitt Kinau. These are all individuals tied in with Princess Ruth. Ailoa and Lono'i Kamakahiki, ancient chiefs who were in Senate baskets. Dr. Dr. TCB Rook, who was the Hanai father of Queen Emma. Keone Ana, the son of John Young. Namakeha, Queen Emma's uncle, and Jane Young. So these are the individuals who are brought from Pu'ukaina to Mauna Ala. And amongst them is not the mother of Lunalilo. And that may be the source of some of the friction that would occur later. Now, I said that the dedication would be a problem. And at the funeral of Victoria Kamamalu in 1866, that's exactly what happened. So the officiating clergyman was Parker of Kauai, but he was not allowed to close the exercises at the tomb on account of a new dogma set up by the same functionary, T.N. Staley, that's Bishop Thomas Staley, that it is, quote, consecrated ground. So this is from a news report, where no one but he, Bishop Staley, can officiate. And this set up a friction between the Protestant missionaries and the new Anglican church in Hawaii. In February of 1874, you have the death of William Charles Nunalilo, and his death, without an heir, sets up a situation in which there is an election for the next ruler. That election occurs is between Queen Emma and David Kalakaua. There's a riot after the election goes to Kalakaua, and it is that division of the first dynasty, the Kamehameha dynasty, and the newly established Kalakaua dynasty that's going to have an impact on Mauna Ala itself. Now, although his remains are not at Mauna Ala, he did spend some time, his remains, Charles Lunalilo's remains, William Charles Lunalilo's remains were housed at Mauna Ala until the completion of his tomb. So on November 23rd, 1875, his remains were transferred from Mauna Ala to the Lunalilo tomb, which is located at Kaiahau. And there, of course, are all of these interesting stories related to things that happened. And that day is very similar to many of these other stories. When he was initially buried or housed at Mauna Ala, he was given a 21-gun salute. The family requested another one be given for his remains being transferred to the Lunalilo tomb, and it wasn't granted. And that day, according to accounts, there were thunder claps that occurred while this transfer was being made. Many seeing that as a symbolic, the heavens giving a 21-gun salute for the dead king. So this is the Lunalilo tomb at Kaiahau. It's still there today. You can go there. It's one of the Sundays in January that they open the tomb. He is buried there with his father, Charles Kanaina, and this is on the corner of Punch Bowl and King Street. This tomb is still there. So now you have two dynasties. You have the Kamehameha dynasty, and you have the Kalakaua dynasty, and they are all being housed in the same building up at Mauna Ala. Following the death of Bernice Pauahi Bishop, you have the building of the Kamehameha tomb and the Wiley tomb on the Mauna Ala property, and this allows a separation of the remains from the two dynasties. So this is the Kamehameha tomb. It was built in 1884, PB Pauahi Bishop. And this tomb still remains at the Royal Mausoleum. And on each of the four sides of this tomb are inscribed the names of the individuals who are in the tomb. So you have Kamehameha the second, third, fourth, fifth, the Prince of Hawaii, the son of Kamehameha the fourth, and Queen Emma. Paki, and you have Bernice Pauahi. So This also will play into some dispute later in the history of Mauna Ala. My thoughts were that these names and the sides that they are on may reflect the placement of the coffins in the underground crypt, but I have no. It's just a supposition. So they needed to transfer the individuals who were in the Royal Mausoleum to the Kamehameha tomb. So the buildings are not that far from each other. And the transfer took place on the evening of November 9th, 1877. And as you'll notice, most of the transfers are occurring in the evening, according to Hawaiian tradition. And that's one of the, even though you're seeing a shift to the Western trappings of burial, you're still seeing a number of traditions that are being maintained even throughout that. John Young's tomb also is on the grounds. It is on the Waikiki side of what today is the chapel. So he died in 1835. So his burial was down at Pohukaina, not in the coral tomb itself, but outside, as it is here. So he had a great deal of respect for the Hawaiian royalty and would not be buried alongside them. So he has a separate tomb, which is on the grounds at Mauna Ala. So when Kalakaua dies in 1891, the building is still active, and it is the building that his coffin is brought to. So this is a scene from the burial of Kalakaua in 1891. This is a very interesting case. There are a number of stories that are associated with Mauna Ala. Again, this is one of those stories that, like the thunderclaps, deals with spiritual things. And at the burial of Princess Ka'iulani in 1899, this is a portion of the order of the procession. This is the coffin of Princess Ka'iulani, and you have behind that the carriage with her father. That's A.S. Cleghorn, and then her two half sisters. One half sister remained back at the house. So it's this order that is the cause for the event that happened at the burial of Princess Ka'iulani. So I'm just gonna read it from the San Francisco Call. The last and perhaps the strangest of all the happenings in connection with the death of the dead girl, witnessed as it was by hundreds of people, was at the gate of the graveyard in Nuuanu Cemetery. So that's at the gate of Mauna Ala. At the time when the hearse bearing the body of the princess entered, the first carriage was that of the father, Governor Cleghorn, accompanied by Mrs. J.W. Robertson, that was Rose Cleghorn, and Mrs. J.H. Boyd, that was Helen Cleghorn, daughters of his first wife. The father's place next to the body was undisputed, but the two women mentioned had no right in that position. Natives were very much incensed that they, being devoid of even a drop of royal blood in their veins, should be placed ahead of the Queen Dowager's Kapilani's carriage and that of two princes, David Kabananakoa and Cupid Kalananaole. All the way to the cemetery, it said the horses acted queerly, and 2 or 3 times the driver was forced to call for assistance from people in the procession. As the carriage was about to enter the cemetery gate, the horses began to back away and refused absolutely to enter. The occupants became very much frightened and remained in their place, thinking that the horses would soon be gotten under control. In this, they were mistaken. It was not long before a well-known Hawaiian stepped to the side of the carriage and suggested that the occupants alight, walk to the mausoleum. They took heed of the advice and got out. The horses immediately became quiet, and the carriage of the Queen Dowager Kapilani drove up and went into the cemetery without mishap. Mrs. Robertson and Mrs. Boyd were forced to enter later on. The natives say that had the 2 women persisted in remaining in the carriage, some terrible accident would have happened to them. They had said previously that they would never enter the gate ahead of the people of royal blood. Many who stood around while this thing took place say that the head of the nigh horse, that's the horse on the left, was held towards the right-hand kahili of the state on the cuff, and the head of the off horse, the horse on the right, was held towards the left-hand kahili, indicating, as the natives say, the cause of their stubbornness. So this is just an example of how native traditions and practices have a bearing even when the ceremonies are done in a Western manner. One of the things that happened after annexation was that these sorts of lands that were under the royal family were transferred to the federal government. And so this is one of the actions that was done by a joint resolution concerning the mausoleum of the Hawaiian kings. Resolved by the Senate and House of Representatives of the United States in Congress assembled, that the following described lands, being situate in the city of Honolulu, Hawaiian Islands, heretofore used as a mausoleum for the royal family of Hawaii, to wit, the mausoleum premises. So this is Mauna Ala, and then it gives a description of the boundaries of the premises. 119,610 square feet, be withdrawn from sale, lease, or other disposition under the public land laws of the United States. Here you have a discussion because the land laws of the United States had not yet been applied to Hawaii. So there were some questions in one of the meetings as to whether it should also mention the land laws of Hawaii. Knox was a representative from Massachusetts. He gave a summary. It simply withdraws from public lands the mausoleum or graveyard where the old Hawaiian kings and royal family are buried. And this is a sort of a sad sentence, sleeping in unconsciousness of the fact that we have annexed the islands to the United States. But he continues, it is proper that their burial place should be preserved. So this is the Royal Mausoleum before 1904. The photograph is taken by Brother Bertram, Catholic brother. Has many historical photos that I'm sure you have seen. But this one is particularly interesting because before 1904, the renovation, you could see the coral blocks, and the mortar was raised between the layers. Today, you can't see the coral blocks. It has a different surface treatment. So this is before 1904. Also in 1904, you have the creation of the Queen Emma tomb. Queen Emma tomb has 9 individuals who were closely related to Queen Emma's family. It was known initially as the Queen Emma tomb. Robert Wiley is in this tomb, and it is now known as the Wiley tomb. Unlike Staley, who was an English bishop sent by the Anglican Church, the first American bishop, Henry Bond Restarick, was the first to dedicate a royal tomb, first American bishop to dedicate a royal tomb on June 19, 1904. So I believe that he dedicated both the Kamehameha tomb and the Queen Emma or Wiley tomb. And he said during his speech, and this speech was printed verbatim in the English language newspaper, great truths are usually brought out vividly in small areas. Here we are teaching the world the lesson that man must not despise man, though he differs in race and speech. So that was part of the speech that the bishop did. Charles Reed Bishop died on June 7th, 1915. He is the only individual in the tombs who was cremated. He died in San Francisco, and his cremated remains were brought back. They were entombed with Princess Bernice Pauahi Bishop, her husband, and they were taken down steps into the Kamehameha tomb by Prince Jonah Kuhio Kalanaoli, and then the entrance to the tomb was sealed. Charles Reed Bishop, you see a giant stone that has his name on it. Many people think that this is where he's buried. It is not. It is what's called a cenotaph, a stone that has the name of someone who isn't buried at that spot. The Kalakaua crypt was completed in 1910. The legislature had in 1907 put forward $25,000, which was a large amount for that time, for a burial place for the dead chiefs of Hawaii. Now, that wording would have allowed for all of the Kamehameha family to also be housed in a much larger mausoleum. But there was friction between the supporters of the Kamehamehas and the supporters of the Kalakauas. What ended up happening was the money was spent entirely for what is now known as the Kalakaua crypt. And the transfer for this took place on June 24th, 1910, again in the evening. And you can tell by these steep stairs that it would be difficult to get the coffins down to that area. But they were slid down and elevated into niches. Queen Liliuokalani in 1909 suggested conversion to a chapel. But this did not occur until March of 1922, after her death. And it was paid for by Princess Kalanaole, who was reimbursed by the legislature. She was the widow of, by that point, Prince Jonah Kuhio Kalanaole. So November, Liliuokalani was entombed here in, you can tell it's the Kalakaua crypt. It's interesting because when they were doing discussion about whether or not they would, who would be in the crypt, there were plans for a freestanding place for Liliuokalani, another one for a Kalakaua and Kapiolani. They ended up having everyone in what's called the Kalakaua crypt. The last entombment was David Kalakaua Kavananakoa, and he had not been named as a prince by King Kalakaua, but he was the son of David Kavananakoa. He died May 20th, 1953. Now, the reason why he could even be buried in the Kalakaua crypt was because the wife of Prince Jonah Kuhio Kalananaole had remarried in 1923. She remarried Frank Woods, and they are buried in Oahu Cemetery together. And so there was an empty niche that was there from her death. I think it was in the 1930s until the death of David Kalakaua Kavananakoa. This site was placed on the National Register of Historic Places August 7th, 1972. And there is at Mauna Ala, the beginnings of the proposed Kavananakoa crypt. This is on the Makai side of the property. And there's a circular driveway that goes around. This is the Wiley tomb, the cenotaph of Bishop, the Kamehameha tomb, and what today is the chapel. And this is where the Kalakaua crypt is located. Okay, and that completes a very for me, it's a sacred place, and the discussion really brings out things that before I started researching this, I did not know. So thank you very much for your attention, and I'm open for any questions that you might have.
Thank you, Ralph. That was really terrific. You can stop screen share if you like. Great. We do have, we have quite a few questions coming through. So Chase asked, can you elaborate on why King Kamehameha IV selected the site that Mauna Ala is located? Was there a particular historical significance, attached to the area?
I know there was historical significance to the area, but I'm not certain whether it was the reason he chose it. Mauna Ala means fragrant hill. So it probably, as it is now, a place that allows contemplation. It also was a resting site for Kamehameha I when he went up Nuuanu Valley for the battle of the Nuuanu Pali. But I don't think that was the reason why that was the place.
Patrice asked, when was the mound sealed at Pohukaina? I understand that there were stairs going down.
Yeah, that's a good question, because I do not know. I have not seen a historical account of when that structure was torn down. But there are, I also am of the opinion that there were stairs that went down, and that there were underground burials, because there are a number of chiefs listed as being buried there, and they're not on the list of the ones that were brought up to Mauna Ala. So there still are individuals there, and I suspect that they go beyond the brick enclosure that surrounds the mound.
Are there any records of royal pet burials?
Of royal.
Royal pet burials. That's from David.
Ah, that's a.
I think that's such a great question.
Because if you saw the picture of the Prince of Hawaii, he has 2 dogs in the picture. I
Right.
don't know what occurred with the pets. I have not seen any records, although I have seen a number of accounts as to the pets that are known of royalty. That would make a nice little child's book, I think.
I was just going to say that would make a great book. There you go, Ralph. Somebody had a question about, will you be publishing anything? This is different on the Kawana Nakoa crypt.
I think there's already been a lot published on it, and it certainly is a topic of interest to a number of people. But most of my interest in research is 19th century, so I probably won't be printing something on the Kawana Nakoa crypt.
Laura asks, can you explain the stone fragment on the John Young tomb?
The stone fragment, there's the stone, and then there's another stone. There are individuals who believe one of his sons is also buried with him there. So it could be just a stone marking that.
Cami asked, why was the exterior, or do we know why the exterior of the building was refaced? You mentioned the coral, and that she said it was really beautiful. I'm just wondering if there was a particular reason why it was refaced.
It was starting to crumble in places. So that would have put a solid surface to protect the coral. There are other structures that have that sort of face put on them. The adobe schoolhouse down at the mission houses has a face like that. The only building that doesn't have the Catholic Cathedral also is of coral block and has that facing on the outside. The only major coral building that I know of that doesn't have it is Kauai, and it may be a function of those stones just being so huge that there isn't a problem. I certainly hope there isn't a problem, because that's a big building.
In line with that, Tori asked if you've spoken to Billy Fields, the master Pohaku Mason from Hawaii Island, who did some work on the Mauna Ala tombs.
I have not, but I highly respect workers in the dry stack method. I mean, it's just it is amazing, and for that method to survive in heiau, that remain unshaken often, is just amazing. Another party that's related to that would be Mason Architects. They've been doing a number of the projects at Mauna Ala.
Thanks, Ralph.
That's off to everyone who helps preserve these sites.
Yeah, it's definitely so important. My goodness. And to ask if it's appropriate to ask this, can anything be shared about the maintenance and preservation arrangements and agreements in place to care for Mauna Ala?
Yeah, I haven't really studied that. I know that at one point there was a trust set up by Charles Reed Bishop to handle funding of it, but I've read accounts that say that there wasn't enough money being generated in later years. So the state has been putting money into that process. I know that the Kawana Nakoa proposal that was approved in 2016 had her estate funding the maintenance of that site.
Phil asked, do we know who is still buried at Puhukaina?
Oh, that would take a lot of research. You'd have
Maybe
to-
that's your next.
I mean, you know who's not there.
Yeah, yeah.
The mystery I would like to find out is, where is Kamehameha buried?
Mm.
So Kamehameha was the daughter of Kuakini, and it's said that she was affianced, is the word they use, to Kamehameha III. But obviously Kamehameha III did not marry her, and yet her remains were brought up to Mauna Ala. She's not really a Kamehameha, and she's not in the list of those in Kamehameha tomb or the Wiley tomb. And she's not really a Kalakaua. And she's not in the chapel. So that's a mystery I would love to find out what the end result was on that.
I have a feeling you might just do that.
Well, I haven't found a picture of Mulaulani yet. That's another one of my
Mm.
goals. It may be a
Cool.
while.
Let's see, we have time for several more. Marshall asked, was Mauna Ala the first place chosen to house the Ali'i, or were there other places for consideration?
Oh, in terms of that sort of structure.
Yes, I believe that's what he's
I have not seen any
pertaining to.
indication that there were any other locations considered rather than Mauna Ala. Now there are other burial sites, Haleo Keawe, where the bones were gathered by Queen Kahumanu. Of course, the cliffs of Kealakekua, where many of the chiefs had their burial caves. The cemetery at the Wainea Church. So there are places where burials have occurred in other places, but they're not necessarily an alternative to Mauna Ala.
Laura asked regarding the stone structures in the early photos, buildings look like they're constructed from blue stones and coral stones. Was there a difference spiritually or within like the Ali'i hierarchy that dictated that? Those different types of materials?
I think that what happened was eventually they ran out of coral. They were mining coral off the coast of Honolulu, and those stones are huge, and the Ali'i were the ones that would get that stone. So, but there's only a limited supply of how much coral you can take from the ocean. Now you could take it, I guess, elsewhere, but again, it would require the shipping or transportation of those big stones. So the key place for getting it was just off the coast of Honolulu. So I don't know of any spiritual difference between coral or bluestone. A lot of the bluestone, though, came from Kapalama, near where the Lanakila Health Center is. There's a quarry just up the hill from there, and a lot of the bluestone came from that quarry.
Interesting. We still have quite a few questions, but I think let's see, we'll take maybe one or two, possibly more, and then we'll wrap up. Yeah, I can also collect these, and those you haven't addressed, maybe you might just do a little response, which I can share in the follow-up email. Phil had asked, where was Kamehameha the Fourth's body kept between his death and moved to Mauna Ala?
I know that his son had a temporary building constructed on the grounds of Haleali'i. And I would suspect that the father's body would have been in that one also.
And then I think we need to wrap, but I was just curious, the change in the burial practices, of course, seem to happen pretty quickly with adopting missionary practices. Was there any conflict within the Hawaiian community about that with other ali'i, or was it embraced? Do you happen to know?
I do not know.
Yeah,
That would be an interesting topic for researchers.
yeah, because that's a pretty big shift. So
That especially would be good for a researcher who knew Olelo Hawaii and was able
right.
the Hawaiian language newspapers of the day, which would have, I think, had that controversy if there was one.
Yeah, I'm really curious. Well, Ralph, I want to thank you. This was too short. We have still so much engagement in the chat. And again, we'll try to collect any that haven't been addressed and get that out to you at the end of the series, probably. I want to thank you very much for your time and great research, Dr. Cam, I should call you formally. And to everyone else here, we really hope you enjoyed the presentation. I really want to thank my colleague, Michelle Kisek, who is helping behind the scenes. Yes, she's terrific with technical support and other things related to the series. Please put us on your calendar for next week, February 9th. Laura Ruby is with us today in the audience, and next week she will be our presenter on the Mo'ili'ili Japanese Cemetery, another fascinating lecture to come. If you haven't signed up for the e-news, please take the survey regardless at the end, and then just put your name and email address in the survey. There's a question where you can do that. And finally, if you'd like to support Historic Hawaii Foundation by donating or becoming a member, volunteering, writing some interesting blog posts, if you're a historian, architectural historian, please reach out to us. You can visit historichawaii.org. You can email Michelle and myself at member@historichawaii.org. Until next week, ahui ho, everyone, and see you soon. Mahalo nui.